The Life and Passion of Saint Cyprian, the Bishop and Martyr, written by his deacon Pontius. Although Cyprian, the devout priest and glorious witness of God, composed many writings whereby the memory of his worthy name survives, and although the profuse fertility of his eloquence and of God's grace so expands itself in the exuberance and richness of his discourse, that he will probably never cease to speak, even to the end of the world. Yet since to his works in deserts it is justly due that his example should be recorded in writing, I have thought it well to prepare this brief narrative. Not that the life of so great a man can be unknown to any even of the heathen nations, but that to our posterity also this incomparable and lofty pattern may be prolonged into immortal remembrance. It would assuredly be hard that, when our fathers have given such honor even to lay people and catechumens who have obtained martyrdom, for reverence of their very martyrdom, as to record many, or I had nearly said, well nigh all, of the circumstances of their sufferings, so that they might be brought to our knowledge also who as yet were not born, the passion of such a priest and such a martyr as Cyprian should be passed over, who, independently of his martyrdom, had much to teach, and that what he did while he lived should be hidden from the world. And indeed, these doings of his were such, and so great, and so admirable, that I am deterred by the contemplation of their greatness, and confess myself incompetent to discourse in a way that shall be worthy of the honor of his deserts, and unable to relate such noble deeds in such a way that they may appear as great as they in fact are, except that the multitude of his glories is itself sufficient for itself, and needs no other heraldry. It enhances my difficulty that you also are anxious to hear very much, or if it be possible, everything about him, longing with eager warmth at least to become acquainted with his deeds, although now his living words are silent. And in this behalf, if I should say that the powers of eloquence fail me, I should say too little, for eloquence itself fails of suitable powers fully to satisfy your desire, and thus I am sorely pressed on both sides, since he burdens me with his virtues, and you press me hard with your entreaties. At what point then shall I begin? From what direction shall I approach the description of his goodness, except from the beginning of his faith and from his heavenly birth? Inasmuch as the doings of a man of God should not be reckoned from any point except from the time that he was born of God. He may have had pursuits previously, and liberal arts may have imbued his mind while engaged therein, but these things I pass over, for as yet they had nothing to do with anything but his secular advantage. But when he had learned sacred knowledge, and breaking through the clouds of this world had emerged into the light of spiritual wisdom, if I was with him in any of his doings, if I have discerned any of his more illustrious labors, I will speak of them, only asking meanwhile for this indulgence, that whatever I shall say too little, for too little must I indeed say, may rather be attributed to my ignorance than subtracted from his glory. While his faith was in its first rudiments, he believed that before God nothing was worthy in comparison of the observance of continency, for he thought that the heart might then become what it ought to be, and the mind attain to the full capacity of truth, if he trod underfoot the lust of the flesh with the robust and healthy vigor of holiness. Who has ever recorded such a marvel? His second birth had not yet enlightened the new man with the entire splendor of the divine light, yet he was already overcoming the ancient and pristine darkness by the mere dawning of the light. Then, what is even greater, when he had learned from the reading of Scripture certain things not according to the condition of his novitiate, but in proportion to the earliness of his faith, he immediately laid hold of what he had discovered for his own advantage in deserving well of God. By distributing his means for the relief of the indigence of the poor, by dispensing the purchase money of entire estates, he at once realized two benefits: the contempt of this world's ambition, than which nothing is more pernicious, and the observance of that mercy which God has preferred even to his sacrifices, and which even he did not maintain who said that he had kept all the commandments of the law, whereby with premature swiftness of piety he almost began to be perfect before he had learnt the way to be perfect. Who of the ancients, I pray, has done this? Who of the most celebrated veterans in the faith, whose hearts and ears have throbbed to the divine words for many years, has attempted any such thing as this man? of faith yet unskilled, and whom perhaps as yet nobody trusted, surpassing the age of antiquity, accomplished by his glorious and admirable labors. No one reaps immediately upon his sowing. No one presses out the vintage harvest from the trenches just formed. No one ever yet sought for ripened fruit from newly planted slips. But in him all incredible things concurred. In him the threshing proceeded, if it may be said, for the thing is beyond belief. Preceded the sowing, the vintage the shoots, the fruit the root. The Apostles' epistle says that novices should be passed over, lest by the stupor of heathenism that yet clings to their unconfirmed minds, their untaught inexperience should in any respect sin against God. He first, and I think he alone, furnished an illustration that greater progress is made by faith than by time. For although in the Acts of the Apostles the eunuch is described as at once baptized by Philip because he believed with his whole heart, this is not a fair parallel, for he was a Jew, and as he came from the temple of the Lord, he was reading the prophet Isaiah, and he hoped in Christ, although as yet he did not believe that he had come, while the other, coming from the ignorant heathens, began with a faith as mature as that with which few perhaps have finished their course. In short, in respect of God's grace, there was no delay, no postponement. I have said but little. He immediately received the presbyterate and the priesthood. For who is there that would not entrust every grade of honor to one who believed with such a disposition? There are many things which he did while still a layman, and many things which now as a presbyter he did. Many things which, after the examples of righteous men of old, and following them with a close imitation, he accomplished with the obedience of entire consecration, that deserved well of the Lord. For his discourse concerning this was usually, that if he had read of any one being set forth with the praise of God, he would persuade us to inquire on account of what doings he had pleased God. If Job, glorious by God's testimony, was called a true worshipper of God, and one to whom there was none upon earth to be compared, he taught that we should do whatever Job had previously done, so that while we are doing like things we may call forth a similar testimony of God for ourselves. He, contemning the loss of his estate, gained such advantage by his virtue thus tried, that he had no perception of the temporal losses even of his affection. Neither poverty nor pain broke him down. The persuasion of his wife did not influence him. The dreadful suffering of his own body did not shake his firmness. His virtue remained established in its own home, and his devotion, founded upon deep roots, gave way under no onset of the devil tempting him to abstain from blessing his God with a grateful faith even in his adversity. His house was open to every comer. No widow returned from him with an empty lap. No blind man was unguided by him as a companion. None faltering in step was unsupported by him for a staff. None stripped of help by the hand of the mighty was not protected by him as a defender. Such things ought they to do, he was accustomed to say, who desire to please God, and thus, running through the examples of all good men, by always imitating those who were better than others, he made himself also worthy of imitation. He had a close association among us with a just man, and of praiseworthy memory, by name Caecilius, and in age as well as in honor a presbyter, who had converted him from his worldly errors to the acknowledgment of the true divinity. This man he loved with entire honor and all observance, regarding him with an obedient veneration, not only as the friend and comrade of his soul, but as the parent of his new life. And at length he, influenced by his attentions, was, as well he might be, stimulated to such a pitch of excessive love, that when he was departing from the world, and his summons was at hand, he commended to him his wife and children, so that him who he had made a partner in the fellowship of his way of life, he afterwards made the heir of his affection. It would be tedious to go through individual circumstances. It would be laborious to enumerate all his doings. For the proof of his good works, I think that this one thing is enough, that by the judgment of God and the favor of the people, he was chosen to the office of the priesthood, and the degree of the episcopate while still a neophyte, and, as it was considered, a novice. Although still in the early days of his faith, and in the untaught season of his spiritual life, a generous disposition so shone forth in him, that although not yet resplendent with the glitter of office, but only of hope, he gave promise of entire trustworthiness for the priesthood that was coming upon him. Moreover, I will not pass over that remarkable fact of the way in which, when the entire people of God's inspiration leapt forward in his love and honor, he humbly withdrew, giving place to men of older standing, and thinking himself unworthy of a claim to so great an honor, so that he thus became more worthy. For he is made more worthy who dispenses with what he deserves. And with this excitement were the eager people at that time inflamed, desiring with a spiritual longing, as the event proved, not only a bishop, for in him whom then with a latent foreboding of divinity they were in such wise demanding, they were seeking not only a priest, but moreover a future martyr. A crowded fraternity was besieging the doors of his house, and throughout all the avenues of access an anxious love was circulating. Possibly that apostolic experience might then have happened to him, as he desired, of being let down through a window, had he also been equal to the apostle in the honor of ordination. It was plain to be seen that all the rest were expecting his coming with an anxious spirit of suspense, and received him when he came with excessive joy. I speak unwillingly, but I must speak. Some resisted him, even that he might overcome them, yet with what gentleness, how patiently, how benevolently he gave them indulgence, how mercifully he forgave them, reckoning them afterwards, to the astonishment of many, among his closest and most intimate friends. For who would not be amazed at the forgetfulness of a mind so retentive? Henceforth, who is sufficient to relate the manner in which he bore himself? What pity was his? What vigor? How great his mercy? How great his strictness? So much sanctity and grace beamed from his face that it confounded the minds of the beholders. His countenance was grave and joyous. Neither was his severity gloomy, nor his affability excessive, but a mingled tempering of both, so that it might be doubted whether he most deserves to be revered or to be loved, except that he deserved both to be revered and to be loved. And his dress was not out of harmony with his countenance, being itself also subdued to a fitting mean. The pride of the world did not inflame him, nor yet did an excessively affected penury make him sordid, because this latter kind of attire arises no less from boastfulness than does such an ambitious frugality from ostentation. But what did he as bishop, in respect of the poor, whom as a catechumen he had loved? Let the priests of piety consider, or those whom the teaching of their very rank has trained to the duty of good works, or those whom the common obligation of the sacrament has bound to the duty of manifesting love. Cyprian, the bishop's cathedra, received such as he had been before. It did not make him so. And therefore, for such merits he at once obtained the glory of prescription also. For nothing else was proper than that he who in the secret recesses of his conscience was rich in the full honor of religion and faith, should moreover be renowned in the publicly diffused report of the Gentiles. He might indeed at that time, in accordance with the rapidity wherewith he always attained everything, have hastened to the crown of martyrdom appointed for him, especially when with repeated calls he was frequently demanded for the lions, had it not been needful for him to pass through all the grades of glory, and thus to arrive at the highest, and had not the impending desolation needed the aid of so fertile a mind. For conceive of him as being at that time taken away by the dignity of martyrdom. Who was there to show the advantage of grace, advancing by faith? Who was there to restrain virgins to the fitting discipline of modesty, and a dress worthy of holiness, as if with a kind of bridle of the lessons of the Lord? Who was there to teach penitence to the lapsed, truth to heretics, unity to schismatics, peacefulness and the law of evangelical prayer to the sons of God? By whom were the blaspheming Gentiles to be overcome by retorting upon themselves the accusations which they heap upon us? By whom were Christians of too tender an affection, or, what is of more importance, of a too feeble faith in respect to the loss of their friends, to be consoled with the hope of futurity? Whence should we so learn mercy? Whence patience? Who was there to restrain the ill blood arising from the envenomed malignity of envy with the sweetness of a wholesome remedy? Who was there to raise up such great martyrs by the exhortation of his divine discourse? Who was there, in short, to animate so many confessors sealed with a second inscription on their distinguished brows, and reserved alive for an example of martyrdom, kindling their ardor with a heavenly trumpet? Fortunately it occurred then, and truly by the Spirit's direction, that the man who was needed for so many and so excellent purposes was withheld from the consummation of martyrdom. Do you wish to be assured that the cause of his withdrawal was not fear? To allege nothing else, he did suffer subsequently, and this suffering he assuredly would have evaded as usual, if he had evaded it before. It was indeed that fear, and rightly so, that fear which would dread to offend the Lord, that fear which prefers to obey God's commands, rather than to be crowned in disobedience. For a mind dedicated in all things to God, and thus enslaved to the divine admonitions, believed that even in suffering itself it would sin, unless it had obeyed the Lord, who then bade him seek the place of concealment. Moreover, I think that something may here be said about the benefit of the delay. Although I have already touched slightly on the matter, by what appears subsequently to have occurred, it follows that we may prove that his withdrawal was not conceived by human timidity, but, as indeed is the case, was truly divine. The unusual and violent rage of a cruel persecution had laid waste to God's people, and since the artful enemy could not deceive all by one fraud, wherever the incautious soldier laid bare his side, there in various manifestations of rage he had destroyed individuals with different kinds of overthrow. There needed someone who could, when men were wounded and hurt by the various arts of the attacking enemy, use the remedy of the celestial medicine according to the nature of the wound, either for cutting or for cherishing them. Thus was preserved a man of intelligence, besides other excellences, also spiritually trained, who between the resounding waves of the opposing schisms could steer the middle course of the Church in a steady path. Are not such plans, I ask, divine? Could this have been done without God? Let them consider who think that such things as these can happen by chance. To them the Church replies with clear voice, saying, I do not allow and do not believe that such needful then are reserved without the decree of God. Still, if it seem well, let me glance at the rest. Afterwards there broke out a dreadful plague, and excessive destruction of a hateful disease invaded every house in succession of the trembling populace, carrying off day by day with abrupt attack numberless people, every one from his own house. All were shuddering, fleeing, shunning the contagion, impiously exposing their own friends, as if with the exclusion of the person who was sure to die of the plague, one could exclude death itself also. There lay about the meanwhile over the whole city no longer bodies, but the carcasses of many, and by the contemplation of a lot which in their turn would be theirs, demanded the pity of the passers-by for themselves. No one regarded anything besides his cruel gains. No one trembled at the remembrance of a similar event. No one did to another what he himself wished to experience. In these circumstances, it would be wrong to pass over what the pontiff of Christ did, who excelled the pontiffs of the world as much in kindly affection as he did in truth of religion. On the people assembled together in one place, he first of all urged the benefits of mercy, teaching by examples from divine lessons how greatly the duties of benevolence avail to deserve well of God. Then afterwards he subjoined that there was nothing wonderful in our cherishing our own people only with the needed attentions of love, but that he might become perfect who would do something more than the publican or the heathen, who, overcoming with evil, and practicing a clemency which was like the divine clemency, loved even his enemies, who would pray for the salvation of those that persecute him, as the Lord admonishes and exhorts. God continually makes his sun rise, and from time to time gives showers to nourish the seed, exhibiting all these kindnesses not only to his people, but to aliens also. And if a man professes to be a son of God, why does not he imitate the example of his father? It becomes us, said he, to answer to our birth, and it is not fitting that those who are evidently born of God should be degenerate, but rather that the propagation of a good father should be proved in his offspring by the emulation of his goodness. Thus ends the reading. Glory to Jesus Christ.